are live. Good morning, everyone. We will be starting momentarily. Hopefully we will get Steve Davenport from the service in person soon. So if you'll just awkwardly sit in silence with us, that would be great.
So just let them know you're online. They were waiting.
I mean, poor people. Well, Carolyn is.
Hi, Steve. We can hear you, or we can hear your mic.
I'm not introduced.
We can see you now, or we can see you on. And
I think when she started talking to the introduce herself.
Do you want to?
Right there, beautiful.
Good morning, everyone. Just for your information, this public presentation is being recorded. And those of you who are viewing us online, there's not an option for you to unmute, but we will open up the chat question and answer area for you to ask questions that way. And only the presenters will have microphones on this Teams live event. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Yvette.
Great, thank you so much. Good morning, my name is Yvette McKenna, and I'm the Water Management Division Manager here at the Albuquerque Area Office of Reclamation. And on behalf of our Office of Area Manager, Jennifer Failer, Jim Wilbur, and Sharon Worth, we'd like to welcome you to this annual operating plan for the Pecos River. First, we'll go over how well our forecast did last year, and then what to expect this coming year. We really appreciate the cooperation of the National Weather Service, the National Resources Conservation Service, and especially the Corps of Engineers for their help in developing this presentation. And I'd just like to acknowledge all the work from our technical staff as well, because it's been a lot to get to this year, but we're super happy and look forward to a better runoff for sure. Over to Carolyn to introduce the rest of our speakers.
Good morning. I just thought I'd step over here where you can see me. My name's not Steve Davenport. I'm Carolyn Donnelly. I'm the Water Operations Supervisor here at Reclamation. And we're going to start off today with Andrew Mangum with the National Weather Service is going to give an outlook on climate issues. And then we'll move to Rick Young and Katie Barnella Sims from Reclamation and the Corps of Engineers, respectively, to talk about what we expect for river and reservoir operations this year. And then finally, Steve Davenport, who's joined us online, will give an update on the Pecos Nose Shiner. And now I'll pass it off to Andrew.
All right.
Oh, image of you.
There we go.
Be better if I was just doing it
All right, Rick, if you want to hand me that keyboard or mouse.
like that.
Yep. Thank you, sir. All right, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for having the National Weather Service here. We're going to talk a little bit about the water year 2022 review. Not going to hit on that too much, but we will be doing some comparisons where I think it's important in terms of water supply outlook. And then I'll talk a little bit about the 2023 monsoon and water supply outlook that we are expecting for the Pecos area. All right, so the overview of this is we'll talk about precipitation, then snowpack, drought conditions, soil conditions, a climate outlook, and then I'll step through several points to discuss the water supply outlook for this year on the Pecos. All right, so total precipitation in 2023, it is New Mexico, so all that red makes it look really dry, but we did have some areas where we even got up into the 45 to 50 inch to 55 inch zone. So it's actually maybe more informative to look at the graph on the right that shows a percent of normal precipitation. And the fact of the matter is that in the last year, and this includes a couple of hideously dry months in April and May of last year, but overall in the last year, we've had a really remarkably wet year, especially out in the western part of the state. But even over the central Rio Grande and into the Pecos Valley, it was a pretty encouraging year for us. In many areas, this was the strongest monsoon season that we've seen in 130 years, based on some of that data last year. So that really helped us. And then we've had a really remarkably wet winter as well, that has dropped quite a bit of snow in areas where we really need it. This is another way of looking at some of that data. That's slightly different data sources. This comes from our radar estimates. A similar kind of story, though, the kind of western 2/3 of the state, western half of the state, really quite wet. Unfortunately, the eastern part of the state has been missing out on a lot of this precipitation and is still suffering quite a bit from really dry drought conditions. So it's probably good we're not talking about the outlook for the Canadian River today, but we will move on here. Previous year, I want to kind of go back and forth for a second to show you a little bit here. This is this year, nice and wet. This is last year, hideously dry, except for a couple of spots where it wasn't that bad. But the point of this is to show you that we are in a fundamentally different precipitation regime this year. Way more water than we were seeing the previous year, and that is only good news for everyone concerned. All right, so let's take a look at the snowfall analysis, zoomed in on the Pecos area. This is from NORISC. You can see that those numbers range quite a bit. This is inches of depth up in the extreme high, headwaters up near Las Vegas. We're seeing numbers in that 120 to 180 inch range, which is really remarkable. Lots of 96 to 120, lots of areas of 12 to 24 down in areas where we normally hardly ever get any snow at all. So really quite a bit of good snow. And if we walk through this kind of basin by basin from the NRCS, you can see here on this is the outline of the graph. Right now, we're 123% of normal, which is kind of staggering. Although you have to understand that at this time of the year, by and large, normal really isn't all that much. So don't be too fooled by that. But I think this graph over here is more telling. This line that I'm running my hand over right now is the median line for the year. This line right here, this bluish line, is the last year's snowpack for the Upper Pecos, right? This black one is where we're at this year. So almost double what we got, getting well up into like the 12 inches of SWE range at peak, and a peak that went on later than normal. So we really got a lot of snow and we really held on to it for quite a while. It is starting to drop right now. We are getting a melt. I don't know if anyone has seen the gauge at the Pecos River near Pecos, but that thing is up uncomfortably high from a National Weather Service perspective right now, and we're expecting it to kind of stay there as we melt these headwaters out. We take a look at the drought conditions. You want to take a look here at the Rio Grande from last year, the overall Rio Grande watershed, which includes the Pecos. Last year, the Pecos was in really dire straits, almost entirely in extreme drought to exceptional drought, with one little patch of only severe drought. So that's pretty terrible. Overall, we're in much better drought shape in New Mexico this year. The Pecos is still sort of suffering, to be honest with you. It's reaching out over into the drier part of the state that's been missing out on rounds of precipitation, although there is no drought in the extreme headwaters of the Pecos currently, according to the National Drought Monitor. But other than that, it's mostly abnormally dry with some moderate drought conditions stretching out into some severe drought as you get further south, and east throughout the basin. Let's take a look at soil conditions. This is one that doesn't always get talked about, but I think is very, very important when we're talking about water supply and runoff. This is a 1-year difference in column relative soil moisture throughout the state from April 17th, 2022 to April 17th, 2023. All right, and we're seeing just a massive change, adding, in the neighborhood of 24 to 32 inches of soil moisture right through all there. Percent of soil moisture. This is really maybe even more telling. I think this is our percentiles for the state. And you can see that we pegged out our percentiles in large parts of the state, including down through the central chain of the state into the upper portions of the Pecos. And so what this means, soils are relatively saturated. This is really good news for us, because one of the big things that's been killing water supply for the last 10, 15 years is really dry soils soaking up a lot of that runoff before we can ever get any of it. That is not going to be the case nearly as much this year. We're going to have a much more efficient runoff coming out of this. So what does the climate look like? Well, for several months, there's been a strengthening signal for El Nino conditions coming in this summer. In fact, we are on an El Nino watch firmly from the CPC. All right, so this shows in January, we're talking about transitioning to a neutral state, ENSO neutral, coming out of our 3 years of La Nina, and maybe seeing a signal towards going to El Nino conditions. This is where we stand right now, the April outlook. They're talking about transitioning really strongly in the May, June, July timeframe to El Nino conditions, and then staying very firmly in that, including out into the winter. So what does that mean for us? Well, it's got kind of two relationships for us. If we think about winter, this is great news. Typically, El Nino winters in New Mexico are snowier, they're wetter. So that means that we could be in for another strong winter next year. We hope so. It's not always a one-to-one correlation, but generally the trends point to that. What it means for the monsoon is less clear. There are plenty of years where an El Nino means a slightly weaker monsoon. There are other years where it has meant a slightly stronger monsoon. It's not as strong as a relationship as we see. One of the climate guys in my office, Andy Church, is pretty firm about believing that this is going to be a weaker monsoon year, certainly than we had last year. But comparing any monsoon year to the one that we had last year is a little silly because it was just so strong. So I think probably what we should expect is an average monsoon year. The state gets about 40% of its precipitation through the monsoon, so we can probably expect about that, reasonable return on our monsoon. We'll have to see how it goes. Okay. In terms of outlooks for the climate, we were talking a little bit before the meeting started about what's going to happen the next couple of weeks, and then we're getting into the driest period of the year, basically. In here, the winds are cranking up, the humidities are dropping. This is when everyone that I work with starts to get really nervous and uptight about fire weather conditions for very good reasons. So we're really focused on that. But if we look a little further out and start talking about generally what we can expect, let's take a look out for 1 month. This was issued in March. This is generally describing April. Unfortunately, we're kind of running through this now, but we've got sort of equal chances for kind of normal temperatures. So not too hot, not too cold, equal chances for precipitation, much of the state. So much wetter April than we had last year. Last year, April, we only received 0.05 of an inch of rain in the entire state, which is ridiculous. And so we're completely doing better than that this year, which is great news. If we move on a little further, April, May, June kind of time frame, we're looking at above average temperatures, below average precipitation. This is the driest part of the year, but I do want to message just a little bit of caution about this. We've made a sharp transition out of a very rare climate event of 3 years of La Nina in a row. And we've made a really sharp transition to a pretty strong El Nino situation. So CPC has actually been having quite a bit of trouble nailing down these longer term outlooks, right? The longer term outlooks, they've been consistently saying are going to be warmer and drier. They've been saying that since November, and they really did not nail it. I don't want to throw my colleagues under the bus. It's just really challenging. So I would say take this with a grain of salt. We've been looking increasingly in the office at the European model, and I was not able to get those images downloaded because of some technical issues. The European model is pointing to more of a kind of average chances of rainfall and temperatures sort of being normal. So a little bit calmer message than this in terms of not being quite as dry, not being quite as hot. We move forward now to May, June, July. This is the tail end of what we like to call spring, but what I call fire weather season. And we're getting into the monsoon chances here. Still warm, still below normal chances of precipitation through much of the state, although we're starting to see equal chances for kind of normal precipitation creeping in even from the CPC. And then if we go further out, getting firmly in the June, July, August monsoon season, we're seeing signals for it to be warm. We're seeing signals for it to be kind of normal with precipitation. So again, just as I was talking about earlier with the INZO, with the El Nino influence on monsoons, it doesn't really have a strong push one way or the other. So I think we're kind of in for a normal monsoon, possibly a slightly hot summer of it. All right. What that means in terms of drought development in the state, we're going to keep the eastern third of the state under really rough drought conditions. And we're expecting drought conditions to intrude once again, kind of into the central portion of the state, a little bit further in the south central part, all the way out to nearly the western border of the state. That's probably pretty true. That's probably pretty likely. This is the Southwest. It is hot. It's dry. We're in a 20-year mega drought. So I think expect drought conditions to deteriorate as we move through the state. So let's get into the water supply outlook and talk about one last thing here. I want to talk about stream flow conditions through the state. Now, here's our percentile classes kind of going from low all the way up to much above normal to high. And we do actually have several points, including the Pecos, which are kind of at their highest point for this time of the year that has ever been seen on that gauge, right? By and large, you're seeing a lot of these really encouraging colors marching all the way down through the middle to basically the midpoint of the upper Pecos, saying that there's really pretty good stream flow coming out of the mountains. It tails off down here. I believe Katie's going to talk about the Rio Hondo snowpack. I didn't touch on that. It's gone, but it's been relatively dry down here. But this is really encouraging because this is going to be the heart of the runoff up here. So again, the soils are wet up there. The streams are running high. This points to less infiltration. This points to more efficient runoff. This points to a better delivery for us in terms of water supply. So let's get into the water supply. I'm going to show several graphs. These are from Colorado Basin River Forecast Center's Western water supply page. These represent two different models. Okay, this long shaded band that you see through here with the line running through it, that's the National Weather Service model for this. These vertical bars here are the NRCS model. There's a couple things I got to say about this right off the bat to make sure everyone understands. These are fundamentally different models. The National Weather Service, what we do when we're trying to model water supply is that we model hydrologic response from snowmelt, from rainfall, from soil conditions, all that kind of stuff, but we're pretending the whole time in the model that there are no dams there, that there's no control over the river. This is just natural flow that would go through if we had not developed anything at all. It can be a little bit confusing. The NRCS's approach is fundamentally different. They're just doing statistical analysis of returns on gauges over the past 30 years. And so they're making their predictions based off climate conditions, moisture conditions, snow tell sites, and then what they had seen in return for those gauges. So those gauges themselves take into account any kind of withdrawals, any kind of control from the dams, anything like that, that gets already kind of taken into account. So the numbers can look very different. I do want to say that the National Weather Service is recalibrating. The River Forecast Center, the West Gulf River Forecast Center is recalibrating all of its basins. Pecos has not been hit yet. That's going to happen in the next 2 years that we're going to recalibrate that. Last time it was calibrated was 2013. So it's not quite as good an agreement. This afternoon, when we talk about the Rio Grande, you'll see that the agreement is generally a little bit better. So let's walk through what all this means. Okay, this middle line here is the 50% forecast. This is sort of what we say this is most likely, right? The top of this line is our 10% water supply forecast. The bottom is our 90% forecast. This kind of line right here where you see the shading change color, it's not super clear on the screen. This is the beginning of the forecast window, which at this point runs from April to, no, this one runs from March to July. That's a typo, ignore that, please. And then these bars here represent the various confidence intervals for the NRCS, right? With the middle point being their 50%. So for example, right here at their April forecast, their 50% was more than about 70,000 acre feet. Oh, wait, yeah, sorry, thank you. Maybe about 80,000 acre feet, whereas ours was a little bit more like 60,000 acre feet. Okay, so a bit of a difference there. It pains me to say this, but I think probably going with the NRCS is not a mistake on the Pecos. We need to do a bit more calibration work with it, to be honest with you. So I would lean more towards what the NRCS is saying. But the message is generally the same no matter what. The message is that we are well above the average. We're well above the median. right? And so this is the Pecos River near Pecos. This is the point that probably should agree the best because it's an unregulated headwater, and we're still seeing a bit of a spread. The NRCS is just a bit more optimistic about what's coming down than we are. So overall, the NRCS is looking, I mean, average is about 55. They're looking at 80, so almost double, you know, what we normally get for our average. So that's really good news. We march down, we'll take a look at Guyanus Creek. This one is going to be tricky this year. I expect higher flows than either one of these forecasts are saying. And the reason that I'm saying that is such a profound amount of the watershed is been affected by burn scars for the Guyanus Creek. So there's a lot of hydrophobic soils. There's a lot of trees down. There's a lot of debris flow. It could cause a lot of problems for flooding. What it maybe means for us is both a more efficient runoff and a much faster runoff on those east and south facing slopes with very little tree cover left. So I think that we're going to see a faster delivery of water coming out of the Guyanus Creek, and I think probably overall higher flows. Again, the message is the same though, higher than average no matter what, even if there wasn't a burn scar involved. March down a little bit further to Anton Chico. And what we're starting to get here is the same kind of story. Even we're above, we're relatively above, but the NRCS is just below 100,000 acre feet for that apply, which is almost double what the kind of average is for the long term. So this is all really good news. And then we go down kind of one more point here, Santa Rosa. We're tailing off a little bit. We keep going. We update ours daily. NRCS does theirs monthly. We are in really good agreement here. Where both of our 50% line was nailing right around 70,000 acre feet, which is, again, almost double, like 170%, 150% of what the average and the medians were. So very good news all around for the water supply, I think. I think generally we can expect that if you guys wanted to use like the 50% for your planning, I don't think that would be a mistake this year. Whereas last year, if you wanted to use the 50%, I would have urged extreme caution. You know, and I don't think you did. So that's generally the outlook for the Pecos River. And those are the points that we're going to touch on. Those are the points where we both model. The NRCS models some other points. We model some other points that they don't model. So I didn't want to mess with those and confuse the issue. I just wanted to leave it as is. And that's all I've got to say. I'm happy to take any questions, or if you guys want to save questions until the end of all of the talks, that's fine too.
So I did publish online, but feel free to type any of your questions into the Q&A section of the Microsoft Teams, and Carolyn or I will read them out loud. I don't have any questions come in yet, but again, thank you so much. Very interesting. And I want to look at your guys' forecast a little bit more, maybe historically, because Rick has been choosing the 70% from the NRCS during the dry years because we just didn't trust the 50%. And so it'd be interesting to look at what you guys had projected during those years.
Yeah, we'll see. One thing I will say about that is, you know, we do our own verification. We kind of see how it's going. Since we've recalibrated the Pecos, the Upper Rio Grande, we're starting to see sort of better correlations going. So we're optimistic that our forecasts are going to be a little bit better moving forward. The Pecos, I think that our record is not that great. So, and it will be a couple of years until we see really.
I think what Michelle's getting at is neither is the NRCS's record. So
Yeah, fair enough.
The Pecos, yeah.
Yeah. So, hi, I'm Rick Young with the Bureau of Reclamation, and Katie.
Oh, Katie Barnella Sims with Army Corps of Engineer. I'm the acting Pecos Basin Manager.
Yeah. So, I guess to start with is just basically that I was really glad to hear what Andrew had to say. So this is a map of the Pecos River and the reservoirs that are there. Up here at the top, we have Santa Rosa, which is a core dam, Fort Sumner, Brantley and Avalon, and then Two Rivers is over here, which will be, we'll show that. This down here, this green area, that's the Carlsbad irrigation area and their irrigated area. And up here is below Sumner is the Fort Sumner irrigation area. So some hydrologic terms or hydrology terms that we're going to be using the CFS, which is cubic feet per second, which is the flow rate, which is water, how we measure water in the streams. Acre feet is a volume, which is how we measure, well, it is the amount of water needed to cover 1 acre foot to a depth of 1 foot, but that's how we measure the storage and reservoirs. We'll also use that acre feet when we talk about a block release, which is, I just realized is probably another term that should have been in here. Block release is when we take we want to move a chunk of water from one reservoir to another. So we'll say we want to move 10,000 acre feet from, say, Santa Rosa to Sumner. And that's basically a block release. The runoff forecast predicted is the predicted stream flow volumes for March through July, which Andrew covered. We get our numbers from the Natural Resource Conservation Service, NRCS is how we'll relate to that. And then exceedance, which we use, is basically the numbers, the percentage numbers that we get from the NRCS. And it's the chance that an actual volume will be greater than or exceed a predicted volume. And we'll go over that much later in the presentation. So the dam information here is the Santa Rosa, which is the Army Corps of Engineers dam. It's water supply, recreation, and flood control. It was first built as a flood control structure. Then Sumner, which is a reclamation dam, is a water supply, recreation, and flood control. Two Rivers is basically, well, it's a core dam, but it's also basically just flood control. It does have one set of gates and another ungated outlet. Ratley is a recreation reclamation dam, and it's water supply, recreation, and flood control. Avalon is basically just water supply. It's a regulating dam from the Carlsbad Irrigation District uses to take their water into their canal. So this will be a comparison. Excuse me. How did last year's annual operating plan compare to what actually happened? Well, not very well. The green line is, and this will be all through this part, the green line is the April annual operating plan from last year, and the black line is the what actually happened. And the gauge on the left, the y-axis is flow, and the x-axis is time, and that's for the whole year. And as you can see, there was a lot more water that came in, and mainly in June through August, and even into October, where the monsoons were very beneficial. On the right graph, you can see where there was really no snowmelt runoff. This little peak right here, I'll show you on the next slide, is this little slight bump, and that's the snowmelt runoff. As far as the AOP versus the annual operating plan versus the observed data, it wasn't too bad. You know, we were pretty close until we get to the monsoon time, and this is monsoon, and it didn't show up in here. And then, you know, what that provided was a very nice filling up of Santa Rosa. I think this is the highest it's been in a few years at the end of the season. And summer comparison, it's not too bad. One of the big difference here is this was the what was projected to be the first block release right here, and the first block release was actually later. This was it here, and then there was projected to be a second block release here, which would have taken it down to almost the minimum storage level. But we got those rains and it went up. And again, we ended up at the end of the year much higher than predicted. And let me tell you, I am glad to be wrong about this. For Brantley storage, it really turned out really well until August, when there was a big rain. This is the difference in block release. You know, if this would have come down, it would have, you know, the same volumes are here to this point here, and Brantley ended up well above normal. Also, this storm inflow happened during a block release, so it really enhanced that block release. And then Avalon, you can see that, you know, basically the model and what was observed was pretty darn close until the very end down here when Avalon was drained for a sediment survey. And that survey was completed in February and should be ready later this summer. So for the 2023 annual operating plan, I'm going to turn it over to Katie.
Hi, once again, Katie Barnella Sims with the Corps of Engineers. I'm the acting Pecos Basin Manager. Andrew went over this a bit. I'm just gonna touch on a few items. The NRCS, where we get the snowpack from, uses a network of snow gauges. These gauges are used to calculate the average basin snow depth, which we can use to get the snow water equivalent, or the SWE. Andrew went over the headwaters of the Pecos, slightly over the Rio Hondo, as you can see on the bottom right graph right here. We did get actually some snow water equivalent, but it was gone by the time we printed out this slide on April 12th. Okay. The NRCS provides probable forecast, with 90% being the drier and 10% wettest, with the 50% as the most probable forecast. Using the snow water equivalent, the NRCS can calculate a forecasted volume for the months of March through July. As you can see here, this is the Pecos River above Santa Rosa Lake. The most probable, the 50% is 69,000 acre feet. And then the 90%, a more drier outlook, is 38,000 acre feet. And the 10%, a more wetter volume, is 109 acre feet. 109,000 acre feet. This 50% is 168% of the 30-year median. So we're hoping to see that. From March 1st till today, we have seen about 8,000 of this 69,000 we're hoping for acre feet come into Santa Rosa. Okay. The same process is used for the Rio Hondo Basin. The forecast is much further upstream at the Rio Ruidoso at Hollywood for our Two Rivers project. This one is for March to June. And as you can see here, the most probable is 5,900 acre feet. The more dry outlook is 3,700 acre feet. And the more wet probable forecast is 8,600 acre feet. Right now, they're predicting 227% of the 30-year median. So as of April 17th, the gauge at Hollywood, I looked there and we've gotten about 4,000 acre feet going past that gauge right now. So we're at 67% of this 59% or 5,900 acre feet, and we still have 2 more months to go. So that's looking well. Okay. There's this slide. Okay, this slide shows how we use the data from our PROM Riverware model. The NRCS calculates the forecasted volumes from March to July that you just saw in the previous slides. Then we select the closest hydrograph from a previous years that most resembles the conditions that we're seeing in 2023. From July to the end of the year, we use the selected graphs volumes since we don't forecast past July. So we don't know what kind of monsoons are coming in. So, okay. And for the model inputs, for the April 1st Santa Rosa Lake inflow forecast, we use the NRCS March through July volumes for the Pecos River above Santa Rosa Lake in the model. This is the highest forecast that we've had for the Pecos at that site for over 15 years. The Riverware model used USGS streamflow data at Pecos River above Santa Rosa from January 1st to April 7th. I'll show you on another slide when we started the simulation. We ran 2 simulations, one using the 50% forecast volume, which is the most probable, and one using the 90%, the lowest volume we could expect for inflow into Santa Rosa Lake through July. The assumption this year is that the 2010 year snowpack shape is comparable to the current snowpack. Let's see, Fort Sumner Irrigation District began their season on February 22nd, and Carlsbad Irrigation's, their initial allocation of 1.8 feet began on March 27th. Okay. Okay, so here is the Santa Rosa inflow forecast using the PROM model, the PROM Riverware model. Right here, the blue line is the 50% most probable. The 90% is the driest in peach right here. The 2 graphs follow each other up right here until they started the model on April 7th. So if you look right here, the 50% is hitting just over 700 acre feet daily flow. And we've already recorded a daily average at Pecos above Santa Rosa on April 15th of 1,100. So we've already hit past this graph. For both the 50 and the 90%, right here, we see June and July, these peaks. Those were precipitation, so we're not quite sure if we'll be able to see these as high as they are here. They may be lower. And then as you can see, the graphs come back together right after July, and then this is using the 2010 data to estimate the flow at the Pecos. And then Santa Rosa operations. Where's that one? Okay, so the model has given us the 50% and the 90%. Right here is the peak of 66,000 acre feet coming into Santa Rosa for the 50% forecast. And as right here, you can see that's where the model started. And then right here for the 90%, that is 33,000 acre feet that it's suggesting we could get in if we somehow go a lot drier than we are right now, which will not happen. We're going to end out the year, the 50% at 25,000 acre feet, we're guessing, and the 90% was 24, so only 1,000 less. And then right here from the model, these are the block releases that Rick was talking about. So if we get close to the 50%, we would have 2 block releases, one end of June, then end of August. Combined, there will be about 62,000 acre feet that will come out of Santa Rosa. And you'll be able to see as we go down the system, these block releases coming in and then being released as they go down to Avalon. And then if we hit a dry spell for some reason and we hit the 90%, we would only do 1 block release at the end of July, beginning of August. And that would be, I think it's 33,000 acre feet. Yeah.
Something like that,
Yeah, it's
30.
going to be 33,000 acre feet. So, then I'll drink. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thanks, Katie. So for reclamation, we have the biological opinion, 2017 biological opinion that we need to provide water for the,
Is the Sumner?
I missed a slide?
Oh, the Sumner.
Oh,
Sorry. I
sorry.
moved you on.
Gee. Okay, so I'll reframe. So in 2023, we expect the Sumner operations to basically be the same, moving the same volume of water that'll come from Santa Rosa through Sumner with a little bit of Sumner leaving. As you can see, there's not much difference between up until August. And then this would be that block release here. And then this block release would be this one here. So, and basically they follow the same shape because we're using that same hydrograph, the 2010 hydrograph. And, the 50%, even with 2 block releases, we'll end up with around 16 to 17,000 acre feet left in Sumner, which should be higher than has been. And like I said, we'll have that either 2 or 1 block release, depending on everything. The weather, the irrigation demand down in Carlsbad, and the weather is the big one. And I really hope that Andrew's caution of being too pessimistic is correct. So here's the supplemental water plan, because reclamation does have to follow the biological opinion of 2017. We expect normal conditions under the biological opinion, which is basically determined every month from January through May. It's determined by the snow melt runoff, which is like very high this year. And those percentages that we have to meet or better show that will be normal. And the fact that we're using bypass availability, that is going to make the conditions for the year normal through December. Sorry, that was a big bunch of words. We also have the Vaughn Conservation Pipeline that has like just under 4,000 acre feet. Currently, that's turned off. If I remember correctly, that was turned on in February, and it ran through to the beginning of the 10th of April. when the ISC is putting in a new well over there in that well field. So with the normal conditions, we have a target flow of 35 CFS when bypass is available during the irrigation season. And the tie band gauge is downstream of Fort Sumner. It's tie band Creek below Fort Sumner, I think is the official name. And when we don't have bypass availability, we go for a continuous river. And that is a target flow of 5 CFS or greater at the Acme gauge, which is above Roswell. And so far, everything is looking good. And the Acme flow, which is depicted here, and you can see what Katie was saying about the block releases, you know, up on those previous slides, they go up and they're square and they come down straight back down. And these are, as you know, they taper off. They go get one high point and then they taper off. And so the 50% and the 90%, and there's looks like a rain event that may or may not happen. So for the 2023 Brantley operations, again, you see that because of the hydrograph, the shape of the storage in Brantley is pretty much the same. You can see here where that last block release takes it up above what the one block release in the 90% exceedance. And I should go back and tell you that a 90% exceedance means that most likely the flow will be greater than that 90% number of 38,000. Or yeah, 3,800. Was it 1,000? Okay. So, and this black line is the minimum pool of Brantley, and we don't have to really worry about that this year, I don't think. For the Brantley releases, the Avalon was, as I said earlier, was drained for that sediment survey, and this is where we filled our CID after Carlsbad Irrigation District refilled Avalon. And then right in here is where the models basically use this regular data or the observed data. And then here is where they start diverging. And if I remember correctly, they started on Carlsbad Irrigation District started irrigating on March 26th, I think, or 7th. And for the irrigation supply in 2023, for Fort Sumner Irrigation District, they're all smiling because they get 100 CFS is their maximum in-stream flow rate. And it looks like, you know, if things go the way that predicted, they will have a full supply for quite a bit of the year. And then also at CID, you know, this hasn't happened in a long time, where it's the 90%, they still get up to 3.2 acre feet per acre, or 3.2 feet. And then for the 50%, they get up to their full allotment also. And this again is thanks to Andrew.
I do it.
But we're not going to hold you.
Thanks.
So yeah, that should put a smile on their face, those farmers' faces also. And that is time for questions. And
So we did get one question after this second presentation started for you, Andrew.
Okay.
How How much does snowpack and albedo influence the monsoon prediction?
Not very much, honestly. Because of the long dry stretch where we melt off all the snow and we get rid of most of the snowpack by that point, we don't see it playing a big influence in terms of monsoon storm development from albedo. There is an albedo effect out there, though, that I think needs to be discussed, and that's on the Hermit's Peak Calf Canyon burn scar and on the Blackfire as well, where we were seeing with the fairly moist conditions that we had last year that those burn scars are generating their own weather because they're so dark that they're heating things up way more quickly than you would see out on the plains anywhere. And so they were generating storm after storm after storm. And we're expecting that to happen this year. Even if it is a little drier, I still think you could get a pretty lively monsoon season over that burn scar for that reason. But to return to the actual question, not a big influence from the snowpack and the albedo.
Thank you. And then Rico just clarified they're doing a well rehab this year, and they're going to do a well replacement next year.
Oh,
The
yeah,
Bond
right,
The Bond Wellfield.
right, sorry. I got ahead of myself.
Good.
Yeah,
Any other questions on operations stuff? All right. Steve, do you want us to just run it from here, or would you rather run it yourself? Well, Rick's got it up. Why don't we just run it from here?
Yeah, that works better. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
yes, sir.
Cool. Awesome. All right, so this is obviously the Pecos Blunt Nose Shiner update for 2022 that I present this data update every single year, both to the Bureau of Reclamation during this meeting and to the Interstate Stream Commission during the Engineer Advisors meeting. The work is funded by the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. Thanks, guys, for the money. And the data set goes back to 1992, which I think is about a 31 year data set. So it's a really fantastic data set. Alrighty, next slide. I probably should have come down to the office today. I'm so used to presenting these things on Teams meetings. I just automatically did. I should have come down to your bureau office. So this slide is a kind of overview of the Pecos River fish community. Historically, 38 native species. These fish are, the origin of these fish, you can think of them as like a Mississippi River Basin fish assemblage. The fish that we find in the Rio Grande and the Pecos are commonly found throughout the drainages that flow into the Mississippi Basin, like Hybignathus, the Trinotropus, Pomephiles, all these species. And then the catfish, the Ichthyolores, they're commonly found throughout the Great Plains and the drainages that go into the Mississippi. We do have a few oddballs that are near tropical in origin. We have 36 extant species, so a few species of 2 species have been extirpated. Rio Grande silvery minnow is kind of the notable one that's extirpated from the Pecos, still found in the Rio Grande, of course. And let me know if you guys can hear me, if I need to speak louder. We have 38 species in our study reach. 23 of these are are native, and 15 species are non-native. 2 notable non-native fish, Arkansas River Shiner, which is a threatened species in its native range in the Arkansas River Basin, and has a small population in the Pecos, and Plains minnow, which has been, it's Hybignathus placidus. It's a sister species to Rio Grande silvery minnow, and it's been identified in its native range as being imperiled. Next. Pecos River, New Mexico. Probably don't need to go into this with you guys. You guys are well aware of the Pecos River. I'll skip through it down to the last point, which is our study reach is about 300 river kilometers. It's probably a little bit less than that as far as where Blunt-Nosed Shiner is found, because there's been some retraction in the last 20, 30 years. You know, we used to you know, on the slide there, there's northern sites up by Fort Sumner. We don't find them up there anymore. They used to be small collections in the 1990s, but we haven't seen them for a long time. Next. Of course, Pecos River is a very managed river. Don't need to really go through this very much because Rick just went through the whole operations and everything about how the Pecos River is operated by the Corps of Engineers and the Bureau of Reclamation. You know, one of the things, there's PVACD, the Pecos Valley Agricultural Conservancy District, which does manage groundwater, and that does cause, in that slide with the graph, the Roswell Artesian Basin, it does cause a annual cone of depression in the Roswell Artesian Basin, which could, of course, affect Pecos River flows. Okay, next. Okay, the threats to the fish community, the primary threat to the Pecos River fish community and the Pecos blunt-nosed shiner and some of these other short-lived cyprinids that are found in the Pecos and the Rio Grande as well is surface flow intermittence or river drying. 2 periods in the last 20 years, 2002 through 2004 and 2011 through 2014. And you can see the photograph on the right to hopeful fish biologists looking for some water in the Pecos River in August of 2011. The other threats to the Pecos blunt-nosed shiner are kind of standard for any of these Great Plains cyprinids. Habitat loss. The Pecos River is locked in place. It's as we saw this year with the floods, it really doesn't move outside of its current banks even during high flows. Channelization, of course. The geneticists that have worked on Pecos blunt-nosed shiner track this effective population size metric, which is a metric that you can determine through genetics, where you're finding the actual number of individuals that are contributing to the next generation. So the number of breeders in the population. The latest work is still in progress. The Bureau of Reclamation is funding the University of New Mexico, some geneticists over there to do some work. In the past, they showed, I think the blunt-nosed shiner has pretty decent effective population size. Of course, in the past, sustained volume reservoir releases, the block releases can displace eggs and larvae downstream from the better habitat upstream to the poor habitat downstream. Next. Fish community monitoring. Like I said before, we've had annual monitoring data that we can provide since 1992. Monitoring is identified, of course, in the Pecos blunt-nosed shiner, the biological opinion for it that was issued by the Fish and Wildlife Service. As Rick went into, there's a normal and dry year designation. I think everybody in this room is aware of how that is calculated. And of course, we use catch per unit effort, and a metric that tracks the density of the fish in the river for that population status metric. And we provide that to you guys in the late summer through fall, because that's the post-reproductive period. Those fish are big enough to have grown into a sampleable size, and we can easily collect them. And it should represent the overwintering population. Next. We have, 13 long-term monitoring sites, 7 in the rangeland section, which is DeBaca County, pretty much. DeBaca County, I'm sorry, Chavez County, DeBaca County, Chavez County line down to Roswell is those rangeland sites. That represents the best habitat for Pecos blunt-nosed shiner. And then about 5 farmland sites that we try to visit. We're having some issues with losing access to sites. We've rolled up to a number of our long-term monitoring sites and found no trespassing signs, which we haven't encountered in the past. So we're there might be some new sites added 2023. The frequency of monitoring, we try to go bi-monthly. In 2022, we sampled March through November, and we had, I think, 7 sampling events. We usually try for 6, but we added a last one in November because of kind of strange catch rates we were seeing and not being able to get to the most downstream site, which during high flow years can have the highest density. So we wanted to add an additional site to get down there, or the additional trip to get to that lowest site. All right, next, and that's Brantley inflow. Next slide. Recovery goals and criteria for Pecos blunt nose shiner. The goal is simply stabilization of the population. Once that that population has been stabilized, is to maintain that population through the critical habitat. And then there's the 3 criteria, and this is taken from the 1992 recovery plan. You can read these yourself. Really, it's the last one is probably the most problematic. When additional populations of shiner are established in suitable areas of historic occupancy. As I think I say every year, that's a problem for this fish because there's really no place else to put Pecos blunt nose shiner. So the best strategy is to maintain a stable population in the middle Pecos River. Next slide. Pecos River flows in 2022. So we did have river drying in 2022 in June. We were down there during that period of time when it was dry. We had very low flows at most of the sites. And of course, that was then followed by a very large flood. I think the USGS has approximated the flows at about 22,000 acre feet measured at that near Acme gauge. So it was an interesting year because we had near drying or drying at a few sites, and then was followed up a month and a half later by a very large flood. Next slide. And it's a photograph that we've all seen numerous times, and that's the remote camera at the Highway 70 bridge north of Roswell, showing the floodwaters directly downstream of the bridge. I think the USGS has some better photographs, but that's the one from the remote camera. Next slide. And this is one of the things that we saw after the large floods. Even though the channel didn't change much, there didn't seem to be a whole lot of bank erosion at any of our sites. There was some bank erosion, but nothing major. But we did see is these areas with immense amounts of sand deposited. And we saw this at 2 or 3 of the sites north of Roswell, up in the farmland section. They were often in association with the ephemeral arroyos that flash flooded and then spread out and deposited sand. Or in this case, I think this is actual Pecos River floodwater that jumped the banks, spread out, and then deposited this sand. This is directly downstream of Bosque Draw, which is a pretty big tributary or arroyo that comes in from the east side. And I think that pushed all that water with the other flood water that was coming in from upstream and deposited all that sand. There was, that person is walking on the far right. There used to be a fence line that's completely gone. So yeah, it was, those are the changes that we saw. And then road access was a bit funky after the flood. Some of the roads were washed out. Next. Some of the quick results: we collected 22 species of fish in our monitoring in 2022. 94% of these fish were cyprinids, so minnows, shiners. The red shiner, Cyprinella lutrensis, was most common, and our focus fish, Pecos blunt nose shiner, was the 4th most common fish. And we almost 3/4 of the fish that we collected were native, which is kind of typical for our monitoring. The most what we encounter in the Pecos River is almost entirely, the majority of the fish are always native fish. Next. So here's some of the, the data presented by 4-month trimester. So the number of samples, so January through April, May through July, August, September through December, and the number of fish that we've collected, the number of Pecos blunt nose shiner, the area sampled, and then the 2 metrics that we report, shiner per 100 square meters and percent abundance. And the most interesting one for everybody, of course, is that August, September through December, shiner per 100 square meters, which was 10.8 fish per 100 square meters. Not really that bad. And that was, so they were about 8% of the fish community in that same time period. Next. This is by river section. We did one collection in the tailwater, and that's up by Fort Sumner, and we didn't find any fish or any Pecos bluntnose shiner in that reach. The rangeland section, so Tabasco, Chavez County, line down to Roswell, we had the majority of bluntnose shiner, and this is an annual abundance, not that fall. So about almost 15 fish per 100 square meter, about 10%. Less in the farmland section, which is that downstream of Roswell to Brantley inflow, but more than in the past. So I think this is because eggs and larvae were displaced, and we collected them in the fall. So about 10 shiner per 100 square meter in that lower section. And then of course about half the the fish, it represents about half the or about what we found up in the rangeland section as far as percent of the fish community. Next slide. And their annual metrics to compare to previous years. And so this is not the fall trimester, this is annual. And so for the annual metric, we had about 13 bluntnose shiner per 100 square meters. So that is a decline from the last 4 years, but it's still certainly not one of those alarming numbers. It's not so low that there's a reason for a dramatic concern. And it's the same, the same data is presented for each one of those years. Number of samples, number of bluntnose shiner, the area sampled, and then the two metrics. Next slide. And then this is something I incorporated a number of years ago, and this is a slide which shows the number of days that the river was dry in the Pecos River from 2000 to the present. We had those 2 periods of time when the river experienced multiple years of river drying, and then in 2022 we had a short period of time, and so it was about 9 or 11 days, I forget exactly, where the Acme gauge was less than 1.0 CFS. And of course, what we like to highlight is that decline of catch rate for Pecos bluntnose shiner in the lower graph, where there's the first year or during the river drying, the catch rates seem to be okay, but then it dramatically decreases by like the second or third year of river drying. And in 2022, that is the third trimester catch rate metric presented with a single standard error, and you can see how that catch rate has declined from the previous year. Next slide. And this is just the same data presented in a graph, and those circled values for Pecos bluntnose shiner per 100 square meters shows you how low that it got. Just there's your number. By 2005, after 3 years of surface flow intermittence, it was below 2 fish per 100 square meters. Same thing in 2014. By the second year or third year, it dropped below 2 fish per 100 square meter. The good news is that our data has shown that the species does rebound once surface flow is reestablished. Next slide. And then this is the catch rate for that third trimester, which is, of course, what is reported for the take metric for the species to the Bureau. So in 2022, like I said before, about 11 fish per 100 square meter. But you can see the trajectory through the years, how it was increasing up through, 2021, and then we had a decrease this year. Next. So that is it. That's all I have. The summary: Pecos River flows were not continuous as measured at the near Acme gauge, though previously, we'd had continuous flow in the Pecos between 2014 and 2021, drying in 2022 in June, large flood in August. Annual abundance metrics, they declined compared to the previous year. And there's your trimester 3 catch rate, 10.8 fish per 100 square meter. And, you know, I think it's been discussed previously in other meetings and certainly with, you know, folks at the Ecological Services Field Office and what they've reported, is that it's difficult to say, you know, pin why catch rates declined compared to the previous year, because we had a massive flood which can displace eggs and larvae downstream, and we also had a river drying event which of course can kill fish, disrupt reproduction and all that. So, but with the two things happening in the same year, you know, I can't say that, you know, this is why your catch rates declined. And I think that's all I have. I could take questions if anybody has anything.
Thank you, Steve. I think we have one. So Dan from ISC, he wants to know, is M squared change mostly due to a change in river depth?
No, we don't use depth in calculating catch rate.
Just surface area?
Yeah, so we measure the length of the seine hall. And so it's length of seine hall by a standard width. So our seines are 3 meters wide. And so we subtract 0.5. So we multiply every seine hall by 2.5 meters because we don't stretch them fully. So that's how we calculate it. You know, we occasionally will, if we do really narrow seine halls, we decrease it to 1.5 or 2. That's the measurement, but we don't do a volumetric estimate. Some people do that. And we do have depth measurements, but we don't use it to calculate a volumetric metric.
Thanks. Anybody else have questions for any of our speakers?
Right, well, I'll keep it open for a little bit. I also published in the chat, if you did not get an invitation directly from me, Michelle from Reclamation this year, for this meeting and you would like to, you can either put your email address in the questions, and I get them first and I don't have to publish it, so I'll just get your email address and I won't publish it. Or you can email us. You can email Carolyn's email at cdonnelly@usbr.gov and let us know you would like to be added to the invitation for next year, and we will add you.
And I also published a couple of things for folks, a couple of links. Reclamation has some water ops, a water ops page that has various links and information on it. And then also we're very proud of our new Power BI operations pages. That's the second longer link. So check those out and hope you all enjoy them.
Great, thank you all. Just so everyone knows, there was about 16 attendees online today. So I hope, I can't see who they are, but I hope that it's a wide variety of the public and our stakeholders that participated today. And we appreciate all of you for participating. And I'm going to end the live event now.
Thank you.
Oh, wait, question.
Oh.
Oh, no, yeah, we're good. Thanks.